And we are back with the third and final segment of this interview with Mark Krawczynski, architect from Sydney and from Warsaw. We're talking about sustainable architecture, and let's talk about the thing that actually powers all of this. Let's talk about filthy lucre and money, because the road to sustainable cities is not really barred by technologies that are unavailable or impossible. It's barred by lack of investment, or perhaps investment in not necessarily the most sustainable of situations. With the very recent, if you like, change of consciousness in business, in major business, with the BlackRock letter to shareholders, with the Goldman Sachs decisions, with other large banks and financial institutions choosing to communicate, at least, we will see how far they go down that path and how soon, but to communicate at least that they believe sustainable business is a far better investment than unsustainable business. How long do you think it will be before we see this wholesale adoption of sustainable architecture as really, as we were talking at the beginning of this interview, as simply being architecture?
Well, I believe it can start right now, but of course nobody's going to jump in with $1 billion to build a 80-story triple-winged building, because why be the first and maybe something will go wrong? I mean, everybody's a little bit suspicious. Everybody likes things the way they are. We're all dying with lung problems and other diseases, but you know, it's not that visible. I'm still alive, so I'm okay. People are afraid of change. Let's be honest. I mean, when the steam train was invented, people thought it was the devil's machine. I mean, how could you have a steam train? It's going so fast it'll kill everybody. Or a car, a motor car. People are resistant to change, and especially if you've got a big corporation. As I said before, the various levels of employees, or let's call it the team for want of a better word, are working in isolation in their own specialization. And the guy on top, he's not digging the concrete, or he's not putting up the bricks. He's just thinking about what's the bottom line. Now, fortunately, a lot of people like the companies you mentioned, Goldman Sachs, etc., are realizing at last that, gee, if something costs half as much, why aren't we selling this for the same price?
Well, it's possibly a little more simple than that. It's a question of investments which may seem reasonable now, going to zero within a very short period of time, and these financial institutions being in breach of fiduciary responsibility to their shareholders, who wouldn't be particularly happy, and they would scream blue murder, and large lawsuits would follow. These are reasonable, rational, we hope, human beings in charge of large investments. So they are, of course, already seeing the light and realizing that renewables and sustainable architecture are a long-term investment, and unsustainable architecture is a rather a poor short-term proposition to actually lose money.
But if you can start right now with a smaller project, which will prove all this working so well, let's be honest, electricity costs will not go down if we stick with coal or with oil. They're going to go up. I mean, I just got an electricity bill that they're saying, we have retained your price, but next year you watch out because it'll be a lot higher. Now, nobody's writing to me, oh, but next year the price will be 10% lower. No, it's never going to happen. But if you use renewable energy, the price of energy can be 30 to 40 to 50% lower. Now, okay, so a corporate leader, I know there are lots of angles to this, lots of arguments, but a corporate leader might say, gee, if I sell it for the same price for the next 10 years, not even raise the price like I am doing now, I'll be making 3 times more money.
And the customers will love me.
And the customers will love me. And I have an image of a social responsible company. Isn't this wonderful? Maybe I'm going to get out of my chair today and I'll talk to the guys in marketing, see if this is really sensible, and talk to our technicians. I mean, I haven't seen them for 6 months, but I think it's time that I spoke to these people and we'll think outside the square, not just the same meeting with my 10 friends every week. We'll talk to the guys who actually make this stuff, who build these buildings. Well, there are so many different elements. There's the developer, there's the builder, there's a transmission line constructor, there's a maintenance guy, there's the coal plant producer, there's the coal-powered power plant company as well. It's all very segmented. If we don't talk to each other and think about the whole problem, the whole challenge holistically, it's going to be hard to make the leap forward. I'm suggesting that if we build one of these buildings on a scale of 20 million euros for a start, to show that this really works.
So a fairly small project by real estate.
A medium-sized project, small project by some standards. We can even make it for 30 million zloty if we go to the minimum scale, which is about 6 to 7 floors. It'll show that it works.
So what you're actually saying mirrors fairly precisely trends out there, general trends, caused by this thing called digital transformation. It's something of a cliche to say that we're in the middle of a fourth industrial revolution, but of course we know that we are. And one of these trends is this confluence of business models really being smashed together to create new ways of creating value. And these new business models are powered by technology, by software, by engineering solutions, but they're also powered by a simple mindset that what has been so far is simply not enough.
I believe that the biggest obstacle will be change of mindset. If we just produce more of the same, we'll never make the appropriate leap forward. The technologies already exist in every one of these examples, but they exist individually. Now, unfortunately, if you just rely on solar panels, on photovoltaics, you won't have power at night. So in winter, you've got about 16 hours of no power. That can be overcome, of course, with many different methods. One of them is that you use wind power at that time. And wind power can be either wind blowing along the ground or wind which is coming up the building, because it has to go somewhere, it can't go into the ground. So you've got vertical axis turbines in the middle of the building, which compresses the wind, as I mentioned before. You've got horizontal turbines in the edge of the building, in the roof. And if you'll notice in all cyclonic areas, when you have a problem, when you have a cyclone, the first thing that goes off is the roof.
It's the updraft.
It's the updraft. Now, if you use the updraft turbines as an additional simple technology which really works, you've got 3 technologies which you've combined. Actually 4, because the solar panels on the roof are a bit different to the solar panels on the wall. So you've got 2 types of solar panels which are now incredibly efficient. I mean, incredibly by, if you look at the last 10 years.
Well, we have crossed 30% efficiency, right?
Yeah. So, I mean, the world has changed dramatically in the last 25 years, and so has the energy industry, or it should have, by adopting the individual technologies, but the ultimate solution is to combine 3 or 4 of them to create power all the time. And during the transition period, of course, there'll be some surprises and some things that we hadn't anticipated. There'll be some little glitch in giving continuous power. That's why in Poland we actually have an innovative approach now. You can sell the clean power that you make to the city grid or to the national grid. And during a time when you haven't got power, you can actually take it back, you can buy it back, but they will pay you for your excess 80% of its value. So you pay 20%, you just lose 20% of what you produced, but you're producing it for free. The solar panels are there anyway, and they're producing enormous amounts of power in summer during the middle of the day.
And this is significant because we are actually in a fairly conservative market.
Yes.
which kind of brings me to the next question. In Warsaw, where we are today, there seems to be a residential building boom going on. A developer can or might be able to quickly sell all of the apartment stock pretty much off the plan. Much the same is going on in logistics. As I drive into town from my house, I drive past 3 zones where there is huge warehouse development going on, hundreds of thousands of square meters. Not a single PV to be installed anywhere on any of them. It seems somehow strange that in this buoyant market, people are not trying new solutions. Perhaps, to my mind, this might be the sort of market in which you would feel safe to try new solutions. Or maybe is the market just not ready for it? How do we change that mindset?
I was curious about that because I also thought, well, during a boom time is the best time to introduce new technologies. It doesn't work like that. If you're making money at a very fast rate and you're building 10 buildings this year and 20 buildings next year, you want to maximize your profit when the boom time is in full swing. Oh, but I want to introduce a new technology. That means next year I won't build 20 standard buildings, I'll only build 15 because I'll have to spend time and planning on something new. I'll wait till there's a crash. When there's no building required, I'll build only 2 buildings with new technology. So it's surprising to find, and I heard this from a couple of developers who I know personally very well, they said, I don't want to waste my time and miss out on 30 million zloty extra profit, just profit this year. I want to make the profit now, and next year I'll make 50 million, and then I don't care what happens. Well, what about the new technology? Well, when the crash comes and I'm not building 50 new buildings, I will then think about one special project that will be our cherry on the cake.
You can just see it, right? The crash has come, the activity has dropped by 80%, and that is, of course, naturally the time when everybody goes, yes, this is when I go heavy on innovation, right? This is when I invest lots and lots of that money that I made in the previous 5 years.
Yes.
That doesn't work either. That doesn't happen.
Well, it doesn't yet.
So we're stuck in this sort of short-termist thinking, which is a normal human thing. We're not talking about these being evil people. These are just normal people who think in 2, 3, 5 year horizons. But in order to address the big issue that is this giant mammoth in the room of the issue of climate change, we have to think in 20, 30, 50 year horizons. Business is generally pragmatic. Maybe the pragmatism of, okay, it's okay now, but then we're talking about it not being very okay. Maybe that there is pragmatism in there that we can play on. What do you think?
Well, I think the time will come in the next year or two when things will be more challenging. You can't just produce millions of extra square meters of standard buildings because the market is going to slow down. I mean, it's a wave motion. I saw it in Australia 3 times, from a boom to a crash of enormous proportions. And I found it surprising. Why don't people see this a year before? They're still commissioning new buildings when they know that there will be a downturn in the next 18 months. So when they sell the last 5 of these buildings, they won't be able to sell them. But people are saying, well, but my friend is building 3 new ones, my other friend is building 6 new ones, and we know it'll all break up one day, but I don't want to miss out on this profit margin. We are creatures of habit. We love routine because it's working now. And if it falls over in 2 years, well, at least I would have made a lot of money in the meantime. But that is the time when we will really start to look at alternatives, because unfortunately, profit is the main motivator. I am encouraged to find that some companies like Saks, like IKEA is willing to pay 10% more for rentable space if it's supplied with power from clean technologies. So they're willing to pay 10% more because they want to be a flagship. They want to be seen as a socially responsible company.
We'll be talking about sustainable retail in one of the programs coming up.
That's very important. I mean, people are thinking now a bit outside the square, but it's difficult to break a routine which we've been working in, well, with boom and bust for the last 60 years in Australia. Market's been going up and down, but always on the way up. Now let's not break that cycle because we don't want it ever to go down. We want it to keep on going up and up in those ways.
But we're talking about a fundamental shift in the strategic background.
Yes.
It's not just that markets are changing. It's the earth on which the markets are based, in which the markets are based, is changing. This is a far greater, far deeper problem than simply market fluctuations.
It certainly is. It's very deep and very tragic because I think one of the elements, people are still very susceptible to tragedies, more than successes even. And what's happened in Australia recently has been an enormous tragedy. I mean, 1 billion animals died in those bushfires. The biggest bushfires ever, I think, anywhere in the world.
Well, we have in Australia, of course, we have bushfires. They're fairly standard feature of the landscape. But an indication of the extent of this disaster is what the current bushfires have been called, and we've had the Black Wednesday, the Black Christmas, the Black Saturday bushfires, and the current bushfires are called the Black Summer bushfires. We're talking about orders of magnitude greater, and unfortunately this is the new normal. Let's maybe finish up on a positive note. A comment which comes up quite often in Warsaw, in Poland, where we are now, and in other countries within this general geographic area. This kind of project, all these photovoltaics, oh, this is great for Africa. This is great for Australia, ironically. But this will never work in our geography. That's not true, is it?
It's not true because every country, except in the Arctic, on the Antarctic Circle, where there are nights for 3 months non-stop, but every country has sun. Now, okay, you might have slightly less sun in some countries. Poland has less sun intensity than South Australia, for example. But then we don't need as much energy to air condition our buildings. In South Australia, most of the power is used in air conditioning buildings because it's incredibly hot. I mean, 40 degrees is not that unusual. In Poland, we've got slightly less sun, but we are really warming, not from an extreme -50, but from temperatures which are around about 0, or maybe -10. And we're cooling when we get in summer, we're cooling from temperatures of only 30 degrees and not 50. So we might have a bit less sun, but every country has sun. Every country has wind. Almost every country has water. I mean, Dubai might not have much water, but they seem to cope. But another technology, which is another story, I'll just mention it. You can actually have a closed cycle reticulation system from roof tanks through gravity turbines down to the bottom, which can produce enough power to run a building at night. And then you pump up the water to the roof tank again in the middle of the day when you have too much power.
Energy storage.
And it's in storage.
As we know, energy never dissipates, it only changes.
Exactly.
Changes form, right?
So it's kinetic energy which just changes and it recycles every day or every second day. So even when the sun is not as strong, you still have enough power to pump this water back up because for about 3 hours in the middle of the day in summer, you have plenty of sun in Poland, even if it's behind clouds. The solar panels are now so sensitive that you don't have to have full sun. You can have sun behind clouds. So the technologies are so much better now than they were 10 years ago that there is no question that this might not work. The question is, how well will it work? And how fast will we start to install these systems into buildings at the planning stage? Because you have to plan them right from the beginning. If you have buildings which are not which are parallel and they have no convergence, well, you don't compress the wind. That's one problem. The other very positive thing is that we've had windmills, we have wind farms for many years. They're okay. They have to be a long way away from the city because those big propellers need a lot of space and they can't be next to each other. But there is a better solution, which surprisingly, the best designs, patented designs, are made in Poland. They're not sold widely throughout the world because of the opposition from fossil fuel lobbies. But the vertical axis turbines, the best designs are from Poland, and they are much more efficient, have a much greater output than the big propellers, the big windmills in the open fields or in the sea.
And they don't need anywhere nearly as much space.
They don't need much space, and they can be in the building, not 200 kilometers away in the middle of the Baltic Ocean. I mean, it's all here. It's just a matter of being honest with each other. Let's not just make bigger corporations to make bigger profit and not get the right result. With these types of buildings that create their own energy, we have the power in our hands to really change the way that the world is now overheated, overpolluted. It's all here, ready to be installed, ready to be incorporated, to be integrated in these buildings. It's just a matter of mindset and willpower and determination. So that's my positive slant on it. I think it's all here, ready to be used.
Mark Krawczynski,
Thank you.
thank you very much.
Thank you.
Always a pleasure.
It's been a pleasure for me as well.